Hi, everyone. We are getting started with the respiratory system. So have your packets out to make sure that if you want to take any notes down, you can do that, especially around your diagrams. Okay, so the respiratory system is, when we think about it, it's like how we breathe. Okay, so this requires oxygen and produces carbon dioxide. All right, so this is how our cells are going to get oxygen when we breathe in, and it gets to all the cells in our body through diffusion across the exchange surfaces in the lungs, and then to all of the cells in the peripheral system of the body. And then in return, it gets exchanged from all the cells in the body back to, as we have learned, it's carried via the blood that goes to the heart, that then goes to the lungs. So functions of the respiratory system, this will be a slide that you should pause maybe and jot down some notes. The respiratory system has a lot of functions. So we can start with just some basic things like, your nose is part of the respiratory system and so it allows you to smell. The larynx is part of it and allows us to produce sound. Our respiratory surfaces in the respiratory system are moist. They protect us from dehydration, temperature changes, and pathogens, something foreign that comes in. Big one is moving air in and out of the lungs. And the biggest one, and notice I'm going from the bottom up, is the respiratory system provides an extensive surface area for gas exchange between the air and the blood. The respiratory system is organized into the upper and the lower. So the upper is your nose, your nasal cavity, your paranasal sinuses, and your pharynx, which is known as your throat. And we're going to mainly hit the upper respiratory system today. Lower respiratory system is your larynx, which is your voice box. And the larynx, when it's thickened in puberty in males, that is the Adam's apple. Your trachea, which the layman's term is the windpipe. So it goes your trachea, your pharynx, to your trachea, and then it branches off into the bronchi, and then into the bronchioles that go to the smallest parts, the alveoli. So here's a diagram that shows what I was talking about. So you can see the upper respiratory system, the nose and nasal cavity, the sinuses, and the pharynx. There's your throat right there. We're going to get a little bit more specific into the throat. And then here is your larynx, trachea, bronchi, I guess it's bronchi or bronchus, and then your bronchial tubes, and then the tiny little ones are the bronchioles. And at the end of these bronchioles are the alveoli, which are right here. So again, trachea, and we call it the bronchial tree because the trachea is like the trunk, right? And then it branches off into bronchial tubes. And then you're going to see then it gets into the bronchioles, these little parts right here. And then at the end of the bronchioles are the alveoli. They look like a sack of grapes. And soon you guys will be dissecting along. Your respiratory tract has a conducting portion. So from the nasal cavity to the bronchioles, a respiratory portion, okay, the smallest part, those bronchioles and those alveoli, the cluster of grapes that I showed you, those alveoli are like covered with capillaries, and that's where the gas exchange takes place. Okay, so breathing in oxygen, it gets into the lungs, and then, in the lungs, we know that our pulmonary veins then bring it back to the left side of the heart, and via the aorta, all of the oxygen-rich blood goes out to all of our cells. Respiratory mucosa, this is really important part of the respiratory system. So there's mucus that lines the respiratory system. It has different layers. It has an epithelium and the lamina propria. And this is our defense mechanism. Big part is that it filters the air warms the air, but that big defense mechanism is it's removing the particles and pathogens that come in from the air. So that lamina propria, that is, you know, that layer in the upper respiratory system. It's the trachea and the bronchi. So this is going to discharge secretions onto the surface, and lower in the respiratory system, it contains smooth methyl cells that encircle the inside of those bronchioles. So just to show you a picture, here is cilia. Cilia, I wanted you to know about the cilia cells, and these are going to be in your trachea, and these are really important. It kind of looks like shag carpeting, and so this helps sweep, you know, debris, dust, anything foreign up, so it doesn't get into the lungs. All right, if you smoke, if you vape, all right, you damage the cilia. If you've smoked for 6 years, I think it takes a year to get the tar out of your lungs, okay, and a year for the cilia to come back. It just depends on the person, but also vaping with chemicals that are in the vape are damaging the cilia. So if you hear smokers that are coughing all the time, that's because their cilia is not working. And vaping, they're looking into their studies that have showed that it's changing the gene expression. It's changing, those chemicals are affecting the DNA. And it could be possible that the cilia never regrow. You guys don't vape, you don't know what's in that vape. So vaping can speed up the lung disease process. All right, so just to show you, these are your cells, and the mucus gets moved up because, can you say that they look like tiny little hairs, the cilia right here? And, you know, this is that lamina propria, and you can see the cilia, and there's another picture here. Here we go. Here's the cilia. So you damage your cilia when you smoke, when you vape. It's just not good. So that's why people have to cough all the time. All right, respiratory defense system. Other than the cilia, your nasal cavity will remove large particles. The mucus that helps bathe our surfaces. I went over cilia. The alveolar macrophages, so in the alveoli, if there's particles that meet there, these are white blood cells that help engulf and get rid of those particles. Your nose. The nares is known as the nostrils, and this is your primary passageway for air entering the respiratory system. It's important to breathe through your nose because, you know, there's those hairs in there, and, you know, the hairs are going to trap the large particles in the air. If you go in the nostrils, the septum divides the cavity into the left and the right side. The anterior portion, you have hyaline cartilage. That's at the apex of your nose. Your nose has an olfactory region that allows you to smell, all right? And what's the big thing with SARS-CoV-2, the disease COVID-19? Biggest symptom that they know you have that is you lose your sense of taste or smell. So we'll be talking about that as well. The mucus helps clean and moisten the nasal cavity. Airflow, you have a superior, a middle, and an inferior nasal meatus. And these are narrow passageways that help with the turbulence of air. So again, what does your nose do? It traps particles in mucus, it warms and humidifies the air, and then it brings the, you know, like allows you to smell with the receptors that are on the lining in your nose. Those are called olfactory receptors. If it's olfactory, it refers to smell. All right, you guys should remember from the skull, facial bones, remember our palatine bones, so our hard palate, that separates the nasal and the oral cavities, the soft palate that extends posterior to the hard palate, and you can put your tongue up in your mouth, In front, you can feel your soft palate, and then farther back, you can feel the hard palate. And so the soft palate divides the nasopharynx from the rest of the pharynx. And we'll look at the pharynx in a second. So this is just a picture showing you some nasal cartilage, the apex of the nose. And I like this picture because you can see this frontal section. Remember, front and back. It's just a cool picture. You can see the eyes here. And what I like, here's your nasal septum, and this is part of the ethmoid bone. And here's the vomer, if you remember that. But then you can see the passageways. All right, so the meatus that I was talking about before, you can see the passageways for the air. So it's just pretty interesting to look at this. And then you can see some sinuses. Look at these big openings here. Right, this diagram you might want to pause on, fill it out. If you have not done this, you should have already done this. But this is one that you'll spend a good amount of time on. And here's your pharynx. The pharynx is just general, the throat. So get that in your head. The pharynx is the throat. There are 3 parts to it, and it kind of connects the digestive to the respiratory. So let's look. This is going to be the nasopharynx. Okay, so it's coming from your nose, right? And then this is going to be your oropharynx. It's coming from the mouth. And then the laryngopharynx, okay, the larynx, is going to be, right in here. So that's going to be your voice box. And you have, let's see if it's showing this. It does, the epiglottis. So, this is right here. You can see this right here is going into your trachea. This is going into the esophagus, into the digestive system. So that epiglottis will cover, okay, it will come down, it'll cover the trachea when you're eating. So the pharynx has 3 parts, all right? So if you've ever had pop or something come out your nose, you should see that there's one passageway, but there's different pharynxes and they all come together at the same one. So if you make a mistake, that pop can come out of your nose, which does not feel good. Okay. Take a look at your palate, your hard palate and your soft palate, and just make sure that you label this correctly. All right, so if you get a nosebleed, some people have a lot of little blood vessels in their nasal cavity, and some people are just bleeders. My daughter has had her nose cauterized 2 times, and we said, forget it. She's just a bleeder. So there's a lot of blood vessels there, but then if you hit your nose, there's a lot of vascularization there, so that's why it bleeds so much. Your nasal mucosa, again, it warms the air. When you're a mouth breather, you bypass this. So it is really good to breathe through your nose. All right, so these 3 areas, again, between your digestive and respiratory. So you can see how, your oropharynx, the food is in there. Okay, so oro refers to the mouth. Naso, air coming in. The air is going to get to your lungs, but the laryngopharynx, you can see that's going to be part of your respiratory system. So here, if you want to pause this and make sure that you get all of this down so you understand the difference between the 2. Your nasopharynx, that does have tonsils, and there are some pharyngeal openings for the auditory tubes. So that is something I did not mention. That is a big difference between the other 2. So nasopharynx is superior, oropharynx in the middle. Laryngopharynx is inferior, and it's between the hyoid, remember where that sits freely, and the entrance to the larynx. And this is where we're going to stop. But remember that larynx is that voice box. There's a slit-like opening between the vocal cords, but we're going to get started on this in the next lecture.